All right, we have our first Jets OTA media practice that was open to the media in the books. We got to find out all the juicy deets, and we go to one of our main squeezes for all kinds of New York Jets intel. That's Zack Rosenblatt. Let's roll, baby. Zoinks! It is unequivocally the Super Bowl for New York Jet fans.
Field Yates, baby. Field Gosh darn Yates. Let's bring him on the show.
Come on, people. Connor Rodgers is joining the show. What's up, Connor? But Trevor Gosh darn Sycamore, baby, for me, personally, my favorite New York Jet of all time.
Wow, it's great to be on. What an intro that was right there.
Paul, nobody does an intro like you, man.
Paul, you give the best intro of literally any podcast that I've ever seen.
I'm gonna lose my gosh darn bananas.
I'm straight, baby. Paul Leston Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Every.com. Welcome to Boy Green Daily, a daily New York Jets video show also available wherever you get your friggin' podcast, baby. Let's bring him right in. It's our main guy, Zack gosh darn Rosenblatt from the frickin' Athletic, baby, gracing us with his presence. Good morning, Zack.
Good morning, Paul. How you doing, man?
I'm doing excellent. It's good to see your beautiful face, pal. It's been far too long. So how'd it feel being back? You guys had a little bit of a, I don't even know if offseason is a proper word to describe your job as you try to describe that to other people, but little this. Now we're back at practice here for a couple of weeks before a nice summer break.
Yeah, and even now they only let us in there like once a week, so it's still not like that intensive. But yeah, this is a time of the year where there's not really obviously not any football going on. It's just like basketball and hockey playoffs. And so, Jets fans and other NFL fans are starved for anything they can get because there's not really free agency or trades happening anymore. So yeah, it's kind of like the season where it's just like, oh, so-and-so threw one pass. He's back. Like, I mean, as you saw with the Rodgers stuff, but even like around the league, you see all these clips of like very basic things happening and people overreacting to them. And it's prime, like best shape of his life season and all that fun off season stuff, that the traps that we all fall into just because we're just like, all right, we have football here. Let's just make the most of it.
By the way, speaking of that, did you take great pride in, I don't know if you guys saw this, but Connor Hughes takes a picture of Jermaine Johnson and goes, whoa, okay, this guy's looking lean. He looks great. And Jermaine Johnson apparently sees it on Twitter, goes, dude, I gained 2 pounds. And then I thought that was funny. And then I was reading one of Connor Hughes' pieces later, and then he addressed the weirdness on social media. He said, well, muscle to fat, potato.
He was doing that in the media room too. He was trying to defend himself. Yeah.
I'm guessing you did not buy that at all. No. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, yeah. So 0 for 1 for Connor so far this offseason. So we're going in the right direction, baby. That's good to hear. Zack, I was reading some of your pieces, some of your takeaways. And one of the things I think a lot of people are interested in is who is the next Bryce Huff now that he's out the door? Who's the next UDFA that can make some noise? The Jets have had a history under Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, for that matter, of guys like Tony Adams and Bryce Huff and Xavier Gibson and Jason Brownlee more recently that have cracked the roster. One guy I saw that you mentioned was Eric Watts. Is the defensive line, is that the position to watch for one of these UDFAs to crack an egg here?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the signing bonuses they gave out, it was heavily favored towards the defensive line. You can usually tell what position they felt like has the best chance of making the team when you look at how much money they gave these guys. And I was, in terms of that, not to get too sidetracked, but Leonard Taylor wound up getting less than I would have expected as a guy who was rated so highly. So clearly there was something around the league that he wasn't as maybe highly regarded as with the draft guys like Dan Brugler and stuff like that. But yeah, Eric Watts. I mean, it was one practice, obviously no pads, shorts, all that stuff. So take it with some grain of salt. But yeah, Eric Watts kept standing out to me because he has Carl Lawson's number, I believe 58. Mm-hmm. And we kept seeing 58 make plays. And multiple times people are like, who's 58? And I saw him beat Olu. I saw him beat some of the backup offensive linemen. He was doing his job in this setting. And yeah, he's an intriguing guy because they obviously just got rid of JFM. I think there's still some questions about what Michael Clemens can do. So there's an opening for that versatile defensive end, defensive tackle type of guy. And I think he has that kind of skill set. So they gave him the most in terms of signing bonus, which doesn't necessarily lock in anything, but it means they wanted to bring him into the roster pretty badly. So he caught my eye the most out of like all the young guys. I didn't get to watch like all of them particularly closely, but yeah, he definitely jumped out. He made some plays, and that's all you can ask for a UDFA.
Do the Jets have an answer for JFM in terms of the 1-for-1 swap of his size? Because JFM was a big boy. And when you think about like Hassan Reddick, he is significantly smaller. He's probably, I don't know, at least 40 pounds maybe, give or take. I don't know the latest roster. So is there a guy that they're going to get with the same size, or are they just going to have to try to get multiple different guys and hope it's kind of, a group setting for one guy replacement?
Well, I imagine they're going to see how Michael Clemens looks, how Eric Watts looks, how guys like this. Jalen Holmes is a veteran who kind of can play the inside and the outside that they have. Those aren't as exciting as JFM, obviously, but that's kind of the hand they were dealt with their salary cap situation. But, I don't anticipate them signing anyone, but, I wouldn't rule it out completely in terms of like defensive end. If somebody lingers and they can get them very cheap, but they're not going to sign anybody for more than close to the minimum, if I had to guess right now, because they're pretty tight up against the cap, and you need money to operate in season and all that stuff. So, so I think they're going to see how these guys look. It's a very interesting thing because, they rotate quite a bit. And right now, all the defensive ends that are obvious in the rotation are Will McDonald, Hassan Reddick, Jermaine Johnson. And those guys are, Jermaine Johnson does both, but like those guys are primarily pass rushers, Reddick and McDonald. You don't really have the kind of versatility that you had with JFM, and so that's a concern for me. But I don't know. I think they'll see how these guys look in camp, and then maybe if they have to make a move, they make a move.
Quick aside, you explained this on the Can't Wait podcast. Wonderful podcast, Tim McMaster and Marissa and everybody. It's a wonderful operation. You answered this, but I'm curious for my fans over here as well. The JFM thing. You knew it was happening because you kind of tried to give us a wink, wink, but you tried to do what you could from your insider seat. And a lot of us were like, oh, well, what could he be talking about? We were in that, the room with all the rubber bands. And what player could he be possibly referencing? You gave us little clues like it's this guy. It could be incoming or outgoing. And then we're like, oh, what does that mean? So can you take us behind the scenes? So when you obviously knew what was going on, but you couldn't quite bring us all the way to the end of the rainbow. What is that balance of information, but you're sourcing and how you don't want to burn a source while also getting that intel and doing your job as well?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge of the job sometimes because you know something but you're asked not to report it or it's sold off the record or whatever. This was more like don't report anything yet, like in terms of like specifics. But I knew it was coming, and I knew the trade had been pretty much agreed to for like I would say like close to a week before the draft, if not more.
Wow, okay.
And like JFM had talked to Sean Payton and all that stuff. So like everybody involved knew it was happening. And that's why when JFM tweeted at one point, I think it was during the draft or before.
It was 5 minutes before the draft, 7:55. And I went, that's weird.
Yeah. And that's when you're like, okay, now it's definitely happening. But yeah, it's just the balance. You don't want to burn a source especially if it's not something like look, a trade is interesting news, but
sure.
In my mind, like breaking a news on like a trade or a free agent signing, like that's pretty short-lived. I'd rather be able to have sources where I can get insight into why things happened. And so that's why I don't always report this, like stuff like that I hear because I was either asked not to, or I don't want to burn a source or whatever it is, or I'm not able to like get multiple people confirming it, or like there's a lot of factors that go into it.
So what revs your engine? I've heard Adam Schefter talk before. Oh, getting that thing you just talked about, that short adrenaline rush of, I've been working on this for weeks. Here it is, boom. And then like it's blowing up. Everyone's like, per Adam Schefter. But we've gotten a few per Zack Rosenblatt. So like, is it that? Is it something else? What revs your engine as either your journalistic engine or yourself when you put something out there in the universe and bells are being rung by it?
Honestly, the breaking the news part doesn't necessarily. I mean, it is exciting when it happens, like when you have something that a Schefter doesn't have because they get handed everything. Right. Them and the NFL Network guys, and that's not nothing against them. That's kind of how it works. Like the teams reach out to them first, usually, or the agents or whatever it is. So when you have the source that can give you something before them, it definitely is exciting. But like I said, my thing that I like better is like, okay, so this trade happened, or this guy got cut, or this coach got fired. Like, the news that happened is big, but the thing that'll last is like what happened behind the scenes to lead to that moment. And you've seen stories I've written like that. And I like being able to tell the story as opposed to breaking the story, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what revs my engine, as you say. And in general, I'd say my preference and my passion is for, as I think you know, it's like writing stories about people and their backgrounds and how they got here and stuff like that. So.
All right. You led me down there. I was going to wait for this question for later, but I do have it here in the notes. What story have you written about the Jets during your time here at The Athletic that you're most proud of?
I would say the one that always jumps to mind for me was when I wrote about DJ Reed. His dad had passed away, as you remember, right before he went out onto the field in week 1 last year. Or year before.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years. It was the Ravens game. So whichever year that was.
So 2022. And, he celebrated an interception when they were getting killed, and everybody it was like, what is this guy doing celebrating? And then he in detail explained what happened the next day, which really blew my mind. And then I was able to quickly get a hold of his mom and some people close to him and turn around a story pretty quickly. That was it was a pretty emotional story. I've been going through a loss in my personal life at the time. And so I just connected with the material, and that story did as well in terms of being received well as any I've written at The Athletic. And so I'd say that's the one that I'm probably most proud of. And having DJ say he liked it too also was meaningful.
Oh, that's cool. Because sometimes I see people get an inside story and they do stuff with their family and everything. And then the player interacts with it 0. And when they're asked about it, they're like, yeah, whatever. There's just another story. I'm like, oh, Jesus, that's a oof. Okay. Alrighty then.
I will say cool. in defense, you're totally right. But a lot of these guys don't actually read the articles, to be honest. They see the headlines like anybody. And so they'll get mad if they see something they don't like. But generally, I don't think they actually dig into the I don't know if a lot of them have a subscription, I would say.
Which, by the way, is there a current deal right now on The Athletic? Do you know that? I don't know if
Tim fed you that info
before this. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I should know that, but okay. There usually is a deal going on. It's usually $199 a month or whatever, something like that. But I'm not 100% sure if that's going on right now.
Yeah, that's okay. But a scoop that you had last year, and again, sometimes I guess this is the full life circle of your job. Sometimes you get to break a great story woo, something exciting just happened. And then there's the other side, which I think, if I remember correctly, you were the first one on the Chuck Clark story last year with the torn ACL, correct?
Yeah, when he tore his ACL, yeah.
And with that, he ends up coming back. A lot of people were really excited about him. He had 1,000 consecutive snaps, of course, before he came to the Jets, and the Jets ruined it for him. But he ends up coming back. What are the expectations for Chuck Clark? I heard an open competition. It feels like he might have even had Tony Adams' job because I assume that Jordan Whitehead was going to start at 1 and Chuck Clark was probably at the other.
Yeah, I think his injury opened it up for Tony Adams to step in the way he did. And Tony had a great he was the star of training camp last year, if you remember. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it all depends on that. We haven't really seen a lot of the safeties and how they move around and stuff like that. It kind of just depends on how he is coming off the injury. Because I think ideally he's your starter, but I think they absolutely love Ashton Davis, and I think they'd be open to starting him. But I think if I'm guessing right now, I'd put Chuck Clark as a starter. But yeah, and I did find it interesting that they moved Isaiah Oliver over to safety as well, because they drafted Bernard Converse last year. They drafted Jalen Key this year. Oliver at minimum should be the 4th safety, and maybe he'll be more than that if he impresses, because they did sign him to a deal where he's a roster lock. So I'm curious to see how that plays out, because he has some ties to this coaching staff and whatnot. But
so what do you make of that real quick on Oliver? Because at first I thought about it while he's been an NFL corner for a long time. It was 6 years, and he had a couple of years early where we were starting full seasons for teams. But as I was looking at the quarterback depth chart and the safety, I'm like, all right, maybe safety, there's a clearer path to making some noise in corner where it's buried. So maybe that's it. But and I had some fans saying, ooh, does that mean the Jets don't feel as confident at the safety position? I said, now that feels like a stretch. But what was your take on the decision to do that? Because I think Ulbrich said as of today, he's a safety now.
Yeah, I wouldn't read too much into it. I think it might just be they think he is better served as a safety more than anything. Okay. And Ulbrich coached him in Atlanta when he was drafted, so he knows what Oliver can do as well as anybody. And yeah, I'd actually heard when they signed him, keep an eye on him playing safety, and I didn't really think anything of it, and I kind of forgot about it. And then because it seemed like they were listing him at corner and all that stuff, so I'm like, all right, so he's not a safety. But yeah, they I think he has a skill set of somebody who can play safety. I haven't watched a lot of him. I actually did when he was at Colorado, and I covered Arizona. I did see him play in college. He was good there. But, so I'm curious to see how that plays out. He'll be a guy I have my eye on in training camp, maybe a little more than OTAs.
Now, let me ask you, I've heard a lot of noise about Xavier Gipson. I heard it last year where people said, watch out. He's going to be getting some offensive snaps. I'm like, okay, can't wait. And then they turn around and draft Malachi Corley, who played whatever, you know the stat as well. Dane Brugler's 91% of the snaps were in the slot at Western Kentucky. Like, if they believed in Xavier, it seems odd to go after the Corley. So, like, is there a path for X to get on the field offensively, or are people still high on him? I keep seeing a few insiders around the team that keep referencing, like, Gipson, he has a role in this offense. And I'm trying to wonder how it's possible. How does it fit?
Yeah, I think they are very high on him. I think that also tells you how high they are on Malachi, that they're like, we still need to go out and get this guy. They've like similar where they're like gadget slot guys for sure. But I think they have different play styles where I think Xavier's more like elusive, going to make you miss. Malachi wants to run through you. Xavier returner, all that stuff. So I think he'll be more of like, again, a gadget player. You kind of throw him in interesting spots. He looked really good in the first OTAs. Rodgers is hitting him quite a bit. I know Rodgers loves him. But yeah, I mean, he's locked into a roster spot certainly. And I do think there's talent there, but it's not like he's an undrafted guy. He played a bunch last year, and the quarterback thing was an issue, but he still only had like less than 300 yards for the season. And if there's any concern, it would maybe be can Hackett find a way to use Malachi and Xavier Gipson in creative ways, because they are interesting players that can be played all over the field, kind of thing, and at running back and all that stuff. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. But yeah, I do think Xavier has a role, and we know around here that guys get hurt constantly. So having like a backup to Malachi Corley, if that's what Xavier is not the worst thing.
Yeah, that's very true. Again, we're speaking with Zack freaking Rosenblatt, baby, of the Gosh Darn Athletic. If you have a question for him, send it in the YouTube super chat, and we will get to that here in just a little bit. Someone else that I was kind of curious about here, because we brought up Corley. I loved your story on Corley and hearing about he seems like he has an infectious smile. He seems like a good time, and you got to obviously speak with some of his family for that. Was there anything that, I think you told me, was it you and the Diana Rossini piece was like a cajillion words, and you guys had to slice it down, and all this stuff gets left on the cutting room floor. Anything from your Corley story or deep dive that you got to do that got left on the cutting room floor?
Yeah, there was some stuff that got cut. There was a lot of stuff from his mom, like just telling stories about how he was a sneaky kid, and like he would, there was like one day where they're at Walmart, and all of a sudden he just disappears, and they have to lock down the whole Walmart, and they can't find him, and then they just go outside, and he's just having a great time, just like riding around on those like animals that you're supposed to pay for or whatever out of the front, and he just has no idea that everybody was just like freaking out, like he was just kidnapped. That was his thing. He was like, she called him mischievous, but like not in like a bad way necessarily. He just like always found a way to get away, and I think that kind of is fitting for the way he plays. But that was a fun story to write. I think like I said, you learn a lot about these guys and their chances of being NFL players and how they got here, especially someone from a small town like that, where I think he's the first NFL player, first draft pick, all that stuff. And I mean, there's a lot of stories, but I think I had this in there. Like he played with a broken ankle for like multiple games in high school, and they didn't discover it until he got to college. So he's tough. I think he's a guy that Jets fans are going to really, really like for sure.
And speaking of Corley, I heard Aaron Rodgers just did the podcast with EA, and he said that Corley was his favorite receiver in the draft, even if he wasn't the best one on paper, and that he had said in previous interviews that the Jets gave him tape to study on some of the top receivers, and they wanted his opinion, I guess, to share with the room. And Corley was a guy that I guess he was loving what he saw. Is that all hoopla, or is that real stuff that Rodgers was talking about here, and they really kind of incorporated his thoughts on some of their decisions at that receiver class here in the draft? Yeah,
that definitely like was a Rodgers pick for sure. I mean, everybody in the building was happy to get Corley, but I think Rodgers definitely wanted him. I'd heard that on day two, and then as you saw them, trying to trade up and all that stuff. I think Rodgers was a big piece of that. Like he wanted a weapon for sure, and I think he maybe even wanted one in the first round. He kind of hinted at that with his comments on the Pat McAfee show that day, where he like, I don't know if we needed that or what. I forget what his comments were.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. It seemed a little,
I think he's not that he's not happy to have depth on the offensive line, but yeah, he wants weapons. Obviously, he's a quarterback, and I think it's still crazy that he's never had while he was on the team, had a wide receiver or tight end drafted in the first round. It's pretty wild, but they would have drafted Rome Duns if he was there. But anyway, yeah. So that definitely was a pick Rodgers was happy about. Like that was true for sure.
How close was that to actually happen? I heard a lot of hoopla about this and that, about the Jets possibly trading up and going to get a receiver. And, obviously the Jets team, when they release their own in-house documentary, they're going to edit the hell out of it and tell us whatever story they want us to hear. But how close was that to actually happening? Because there was a lot of smoke around that ahead of the draft.
Yeah, it was legit. I think they did call teams ahead of them. As you saw, I don't think teams were actually willing to trade back as like everybody hyped up. I think the Jets were only one in the top 10 that wound up trading back.
That's
correct. One spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they had a hard time getting up there. I know a lot of people in the building were frustrated and wanted to, not in a bad way. They just really wanted Rome. They're like, oh, come on, he's right there. He's right there. And then he got picked where he did by the Bears, which is kind of the spot where everybody kind of thought he would. So I think they were trying to get ahead of the Bears. Nobody was trading. I think I forget what team it was. I know the Rams were trying to trade up to get Brock Bowers. I forget if it was the Bears spot or if it was the Falcons spot that they were looking at. Obviously, the Falcons had their own agenda that nobody expected. Obviously. I think that kind of threw everything for a loop a little bit. But yeah, so if Rome was there at 10, the Jets absolutely would have drafted him. I have no doubt in my mind. They loved him. Aaron loved him. I think he's going to be a really good player. The Bears are very intriguing. But Olu was. I think they had rated, if not the top tackle, at least right behind Joe Alt. Mm-hmm. And I think they're very high in his potential and his future. It was just an interesting pick for a front office on the hot seat. I thought just because you're picking essentially a luxury pick, not a luxury, but like a pick for the future.
Sure. Right.
When back-to-back years, when you're trying to win right now, kind of thing. But it could be a win now move if Tyron Smith doesn't play every game. So I wasn't as. In the moment, you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I think as you think about it more, it makes a lot of sense. And I think Olu is going to be a starting left tackle in this league for a long time. So hard to argue with that.
That's true. All right, let's go to another scoop-ski potato. You had this earlier this offseason. Jeff Ulbrich, San Francisco 49ers, mutual interest potentially, and that puppy happening. And I heard Jeff Ulbrich speak on it at his media availability. So what's the story there? The 49ers wanted him, and the Jets said, go kick rocks, pal. We're not going to just allow you to take him. And with the mutual interest, Jeff Ulbrich, did he want to go? And the Jets said, no, sorry, man. You're coming here unless it's a head coaching thing. Okay. But if not, you're staying? Is that basically the story?
I mean, I think more he was interested in at least listening to what they had to say. And then who knows what happens from there. I mean, you get why the Jets would block it and not even – I mean, they didn't have to block it. They never officially requested an interview. I think you kind of just make it clear that we're going to block it kind of thing. And so it's essentially a block without being officially a block.
I see.
But it's important to remember a few things there. Ulbrich, as he said, he's very happy here. He knows it's a great spot. He has great players. The defense has been amazing the last couple of years. But, he played with the 49ers for 10 years. He's from that area. He grew up as a 49ers fan. He has a lot of close friends on that staff. I don't know if this was in his head, but you're in a staff that's on the hot seat, whereas the Shanahan staff is not. There's maybe that's in the back of his head, job security. But ultimately, it's not like he was mad that he had to stay here. I don't think.
I see.
This is an elite defense still, and they added Hassan Reddick and Javon Kinlaw and all these guys that they added, and they bring back Chuck Clark, and everybody's going to get a year better. So I don't think he's upset to be back, but he definitely was open to listening for sure.
Let me ask you, because the Mike LaFleur thing, they basically did what they said they wouldn't do for Ulbrich. They're like, okay, go out and look. And then he gets the Rams gig, and it's the same thing. It's OC to OC is what he comes over there to the Rams. So was that just one where in Mike LaFleur, they're like, yeah, we're putting it on the front face PR. Yeah, hey, we want to hook up with brother.
That was all just phrasing. They fired him, and he went and got hired by the Rams. That's all it was. I do know, before that happened, there were teams that called to, check in on him, kind of thing. But yeah, ultimately he was pushed out. So, I mean, in retrospect, you can argue whether that, if you don't do that, then you don't get Hackett and you don't get Rodgers. But I also think maybe LaFleur doesn't get enough credit for, he's a little more innovative, I would say. So I think he's aged a little better after what happened last year, I would say.
By the way, this is something I think we've all kind of assumed, but I guess I'll ask you. If the Jets don't hire Nathaniel Hackett, does Aaron Rodgers ever come here?
Yeah, I think that's he made it pretty clear that was the number one reason he came here. So, I don't know what other teams were dying to trade for him at the time is the only reason why I'd say maybe, but he'd still have come here. But yeah, I think that's a what if that I think is very interesting to me, just because the only person that knows that is Aaron, and maybe he'll say it one day. But I can't imagine he would want to play for LaFleur when he was butting heads with his brother every day. So I think that may be complicated things. So I can't imagine he would have, but who knows? That's a what if. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You guys had to ask the question. It's your job as reporters to ask these questions. You press Salah, not you, the general, the media, press Salah about the Hackett replacement thing. And he was not willing to dance that dance, it seemed. And then, of course, Hackett was asked about it too. What was your take on how those two handled? Again, they had to have been asked. I had no idea what the response was going to be. But what did you make of the responses they gave to those questions you guys had to ask?
I mean, they clearly didn't love it, and I understand why. That's not really a piece of information they probably wanted to get out, especially but from both sides. Like Hackett, it looks like they don't believe in him, and then Salah looks like he's actively trying to replace his current coach. But we reported that back in January. Connor had his version. I mean, it was the same thing, but he reported it again, or not reported it, but alluded to it in a mailbag, and then it blew up, which he's like, I don't know why it blew up. I swear, I don't know. But yeah, it's a notable, as you said, it had to be asked. And I think the most interesting to come out of those questions was when Rodgers was asked about it, and he's the first one to confirm that Salah has been more involved with the offense, which I think was maybe the most notable thing to come out of Tuesday. Because Woody kind of alluded to that back at the red carpet thing that he did a while back for the award show or whatever. Mm-hmm. He alluded to Robert doing more of it. And then when I asked Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh about it at the owners' meetings, they both kind of downplayed it and were like, "Oh, I'm involved with everything," like the usual coach speak. And so we all kind of just moved on from it. And then Rodgers was like, "Yeah, he's been to the left of me the entire summer, and where he's been more involved with the offense. He's bringing a lot of new ideas and all this stuff." And so I think that's it was surprising me that he honestly took that long for Robert to take more involvement, because his whole thing is always, to his credit, is to give the keys to each coordinator, and then he kind of runs the operation from the top. And he did that with LaFleur, did that with Hackett, Ulbrich, Brant Boyer, and it works. It just didn't work last year when Hackett wasn't doing a good job, and he should have stepped in sooner. I don't know, but I think it's a positive sign. I think Robert has been, he's on the Shanahan coaching tree. He hasn't coached offense, but he's been around some great offensive minds. So I actually think that's a very positive thing if he's more involved.
Yeah, and although on the tail end of that, I'll just quote, the movie Austin Powers. So what does it all mean, Basil? Okay, we got Salah here more involved in the offense. He's been around a lot of those smart minds, as you say, but what impact is that actually going to have? It's hard to answer that, I'm sure, here in May, but that's the curious thing is I'm like, okay, a longtime defensive guy's in the offensive room. He could give the other side of the equation. Hey, here's how we would present it. Here's how you could beat it, maybe. But besides that, what else could there be to the puzzle?
I think, obviously, ultimately, Rodgers is going to be the one that's going to be the biggest difference in how the offense looks, because he's going to be running the show. That's just the reality. Everybody kind of just admits it at this point. It's his offense. But in terms of whether if Rodgers wasn't in there or whatever, I think the way you maybe see it would be in aggression or lack thereof, because, Hackett, I think, was very, very, very conservative with Zach Wilson in there. And if they're not going for it on fourth down, if they're not, if they're doing the run pass thing that they kept doing over, I don't think Rodgers will let that happen if he's quarterback. He openly criticized that last year on Pat McAfee. So I'm curious to see their aggression level this year, because they were debilitatingly conservative last year, to the point where, as I'm sure it frustrated you and your listeners.
Oh yeah, that's
you're just watching it. It's what are we doing? It's such boring football. I want to watch some fun football for once.
I'm sure you do too, Zach. I'm sure you do too.
Exactly. So I think that's what I'm on. And in general, if this offense gets off to a really bad start, how long are they going to be able to keep Hackett in that job is the question. I think that'll be something that lingers, because he's the biggest question on this entire team right now, other than the health. Health is number one. And then I think number 2, you look at that. So because I think they have the talent, obviously. They have top 5 talent in the league, in my opinion, across the roster. If everybody you're going to get that if all year.
Yeah.
But if everybody's healthy, then the question becomes like how involved is Hackett and how much do you trust him to lead this offense?
All right, let's get a couple quickies before we finish you off here. So I've heard everyone talk about the Aaron Rodgers thing. How did we wait this long before we get into the nitty-gritty with Aaron Rodgers? So I've seen the stories, I've seen the tweets, seen the no-look pass to X that the Jets ended up tweeting out there. But Zack Rosenblatt, your eyeballs behind those glasses, okay? What did you see from Aaron Rodgers in that media open practice that us Jet fans on the outside, just seeing clips and tweets and words, can't really comprehend?
I definitely say there's been an overreaction. And we alluded to this at the beginning of our chat. Like you would expect that this time of the year because everything's exciting. What Aaron Rodgers is great at is always going to shine in practice. The accuracy, the fitting the ball in the tight windows, throwing lasers into coverage and completing the pass. Like he still has it for sure. Like the throwing ability is unquestionably there. We just didn't really see him throw it down the field very much. I don't think we really saw him moving around very much. And ultimately, like the bigger question is not going to be how he looks in practice. He's going to look good at practice all the time. It's going to be how he looks when he gets hit for the first time, which isn't going to happen until the first game, or if they play him in the preseason. And that's when you see how he gets up, if he still has the same ability to evade, because one of his he's never been like a guy who's going to scramble a lot, but he's always somebody who's improvising and moving around the pocket and stuff like that. And does he have the ability to do that? We need to see that. But yeah, ultimately, very positive first day. He looked fantastic. I haven't been covering the Jets that long, but even I have seen some bad quarterbacks in New York just in my 2 seasons and in practice where they miss easy throws. Not even just Zach Wilson. I know everybody is going to assume that's what I'm talking about, but there's a lot of bad quarterback play, and he makes the throws you're supposed to make in practice, and he makes very hard throws as well. And he's very, very accurate, even against a great defense. So it's worth the excitement for sure, but I still am tempering, saying he's back, baby, like some people are.
That'd be a great clip, by the way, Zach. If you do want to do that, I appreciate that. One other name that I was trying to will this into existence all offseason. People said, shut up. He would never come here. And that player people keep talking about is Tyron Smith. And I said, please, he's the final piece to the puzzle. If you just get this pure left tackle, it opens up everything in the draft. You don't have to force anything. Everything all else lines up. People told me to shut up. And then they signed him. I'm like, suck it, you bastards. I told you. So they get Tyron Smith. What's your first impression of seeing Tyron Smith, that big bastard, walking around?
I mean, he looks the part for sure as much as any offensive line. He's just very, Rodgers kind of alluded to it, making fun of Bakhtiari, but saying how he's basically chiseled in the midsection, which is such a football phrasing. He's basically saying he has a 6-pack.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's very slender, but clearly very, but not small. He's very interesting, strong, athletic, and you see why he looks like a guy who's going to be a dominant left tackle. And again, he wasn't playing every series, and they're not wearing pads and all that stuff, but he was stonewalling everybody, like I said in my piece. And I mean, if he's healthy, the dude is an absolute stud, all pro, the kind of offensive lineman they haven't had around here. It's kind of like when they haven't had a quarterback like Rodgers, they haven't had a left tackle like him since probably DeBrickashaw. So it's exciting. I'm excited to watch him, and I'm just mostly curious to see how much he practices in camp, and how somebody like him in particular, him and Rodgers, are going to handle the 3 games in 11 days to start the season. That's my biggest concern, is guys like those two. But yeah, I mean, if he's healthy, and it's cool that he's here at this time of the year, he's a veteran, he's been here forever. I don't think anybody would have blamed him for not showing up, but he's been here since day one of voluntary workouts. So I think fans are in their right mind to be excited about him as much as anybody, I would say.
Is there anything to make of the absences? We saw a couple of them at the media open practice.
No, I wouldn't say there's anything to make of it. Some of the guys were injured and maybe inside rehabbing. Brees, I believe, was there on the first day, and then he probably had something. I wouldn't be concerned. I think it was I did a roster attendance. I think I had it around 90% attendance, which is very good.
Great.
Especially since Rodgers didn't used to come, and I think him coming kind of helps quite a bit. But yeah, I would say I was more encouraged by the attendance than concerned about anyone who wasn't there.
All right, let me ask you this. Are the Jets going to add another quarterback? So they tossed out Colby Suits, who I'm not sure that's going to create a lot of headlines out there. But when you look at the roster, there's 4 guys left. It's Aaron Rodgers. He's 40, going to turn 41 in December. You have Tyrod Taylor. He's 34, turns 35 in August. Jordan Travis is coming off the devastating injury. And then you have Andrew Peasley, who's there as well. Is there another quarterback coming to get them through this offseason?
I think it's a fair question because I think they do like to have 4 quarterbacks. As Streveler was the 4th last year, and I think he was. Yeah, they brought him in during camp the year before that too to be the 4th guy, just to have an extra arm. If those 3 guys are healthy, and then eventually if Travis comes back in training camp, you probably are fine. But yeah, it wouldn't shock me if they brought in another arm at some point. I mean, maybe they're gonna roll with these 3 guys for now if all 3 of them are there. But yeah, it wouldn't be anything big. It would just be some guy you've never heard of, probably, just to have another arm in there.
Although that's how we got the Chris Streveler legend. Just a camp arm coming in, and we all know how
bring him back. He still exists.
That's true. He could just be the guy. I like that. All right, we'll go rapid fire on a couple of social questions here. All right, Zach, would you like to dive into the Connor Hughes waters here? Any physical change that you noticed with Will McDonald? Weight up, weight down? What did your note say?
I didn't really. We were up. There's like a patio that we watch practice from sometimes, and it's hard to see. So when we get close to them or when he talks to us, I'll have a better idea. Robert Saleh kind of alluded to it being early in the cycle. I'm under the impression that he hasn't bulked up yet, but I think training camp would be the time to look at Will McDonald and how he looks. Because the offseason's still it's only May, remember.
Of course.
Training camp's at the end of July. So 2 months from now is when they'll be there for training camp. That's a lot of time for him to bulk up.
I think I already know the answer to this question, but someone asked it again. Do you think there's any free agent pickups to come? They don't have a lot of shekels left in the bank account.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I allude to the Quan Alexander signing, maybe something of that ilk, like a veteran guy. I don't know if they're going to add a safety, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say no. Joe Douglas every year has added somebody in late June, July, August. So I'd expect somebody at some point. I don't know if it'll be anybody major, but I'd expect a depth piece or something.
Connor McGovern, is that happening, or are Jet fans just speaking into the wind here?
I mean, McGovern would be one that I would have my eye on, because I do think they could use another interior backup. I haven't heard anything about that. I don't know where he's at physically. He did obviously get hurt in the end of the season. If I was going to bet money, I would McGovern would make the most sense to me, because he's a guy who he signed for cheap last year. He'd probably get less than that this year. So, I think that would be a smart signing, frankly, because he's a solid player when he's healthy. Can play guard, can play center, so I'd bring him back.
And just a quick aside on that, Wes Schweitzer, they had this, if I remember correctly, on Hard Knocks, they had this entire scene dedicated to him of how much he sucked at snapping the football, and Aaron Rodgers getting pissed. And now that's seared into my brain. That's why I want Connor McGovern or somebody else. He seems like a fine guard when he's healthy, but the center thing there, I've really overreacted to that, or have I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I remember him struggling with the snaps last year too. But he's a veteran. He hadn't been playing center the whole time, and then they threw him in there. So I don't know. Okay. But he's a veteran. They do seem to trust him. Again, I would rather have Connor McGovern in there, or somebody just to back up Joe Tippmann, and just let Schweitzer be a left guard, right guard type of guy. But if they want him to play all 3, then that's the guy they'll roll with. I mean, ideally, if you're going to your backup center, usually you're in a little bit of trouble anyway, probably. But I think Jake Hansen maybe has some background at center too, so maybe there's something there. But I'd say Schweitzer as of now is the backup center for sure.
All right, Zach, finish us off here. Your summer, you got any sexy vacation plans? You and the lovely going to the Bahamas or something? What's going on here this summer?
No Bahamas. We got a lot of weddings we're going to. We got a wedding out in California. I got a bachelor party in Lake Tahoe.
Ooh,
going out to Newport Beach. Yeah, so just a lot of West Coast trips for me this year. And and then the month of July, I'm just going to relax and get ready for the season.
There you go. Beautiful. Well, Zach, it was fun catching up, brother. It's always fun to read your columns. I'm glad you're on our side of the fence here on the Jets. I saw you writing great pieces for other people, so now you're doing it for our side, baby. Phenomenal. Thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul.
All right, there he is. Zach Rosenblatt, baby. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow on Boy Green Daily. Take care.